Today we're telling you about a very confusing crime that took place in Spain. This case became so well known that it was even made into a film. But the controversy is not yet resolved. Many believe that the outcome of the case was a miscarriage of justice. Rosario Porto and her husband from Soastra were affluent people. Rosario's father was an influential honorary consul of France, and her mother was an art teacher. Rosario followed in her father's footsteps and became a successful lawyer. In 197, she was appointed as the consul of France, inheriting this position from her father. Alfonso was a well-known journalist. In 1996, the couple married and moved into a large apartment that occupied an entire floor of a house in the upscale area of the Spanish city of Santiago de Compostela. Rosario suffered from lupus erythematosus, so doctors advised her against getting pregnant. Therefore, they decided to adopt a little girl who had been abandoned by her parents due to the vicissitudes of fate. In Spain, there were significant difficulties when they were a little over 30. The family decided to go to China to adopt a child. After overcoming many bureaucratic hurdles, they managed to end up in an orphanage. Rosario was charmed by the new, months-old girl from the first second. The couple needed 2 weeks in China to resolve all difficulties and officially adopt the girl. On the return flight to Spain, the documents identified the girl as a Santa Yongfang. An unusual situation, as a Santa was one of the first Chinese adoptive children in the Oberth region. Seemingly, she was very fortunate to live in a respected and wealthy family. Unfortunately, the joy of this reunion was short-lived. Asana was a very talented girl. She was an excellent student who learned several languages, attended ballet lessons, and went to a music school. It seemed her parents wanted to give her every chance. On July 4, 2013, Rosario and her daughter, the 12-year-old Asanta, went to the beach to cool off on a hot day. The girl began to tell a frightening story about a creepy man dressed in black with a mask and gloves who had tried to strangle her the night before. The longer she spoke, the more she lost control of herself and eventually burst into tears. Her mother knew about it. She was there, but for some reason, the woman didn't even go to the police. At 10:30 p.m. on September 21, 2013, Rosario and Alfonso were at the police station, but for another reason. They reported that their 12-year-old daughter had been missing for several hours. The woman, prompted by Alfonso, told the story of the child from a nighttime attack that had occurred 2.5 months earlier. Given this background, the parents feared that an intruder had broken into the house again and something irreplaceable had happened to their daughter, probably kidnapping. The man was sure she was no longer alive. They pleaded with the police to act as quickly as possible. On the morning of September 22nd, 2 men were driving through a wooded area, both on their way back from a bar. Suddenly, the driver stopped and reported that he had noticed something strange in the woods. Not knowing what was going on, he turned the car with its headlights towards the woods and told his friend that he felt someone was watching him. But he was not afraid, probably because he had been drinking. Thus, he got out of the car, took a few steps towards the woods, and found himself among the trees. In the light of the car headlights, the driver saw something on the ground that looked like a doll, but as he got closer, he recognized it as a girl. The child was tied up. Her clothing seemed pulled up and muddy. The man checked her pulse. The girl was dead. The desperate young man went to the police. Asuna was identified. She had died just a week before her 13th birthday. The police searched the area near the body and found the dead teenager's cell phone, on which there were some rather strange photos. Several pictures were left showing her tightly wrapped like a baby, with wide-open eyes. Some forensic scientists believed her pupils were dilated, which could indicate the ingestion of illegal substances or drugs. Even more disturbing photos showed the schoolgirl in quite provocative clothing with bright, colorful makeup, wearing fishnet stockings, and in a provocative pose on a sofa. Here, too, her eyes were wide open, and her pupils dilated. She seemed out of her mind. The pictures ended up on the internet, went viral, and sparked a wave of public outrage over the treatment of the girl. According to her parents, the last day of her life was a perfectly normal day when nothing special happened. But then she suddenly disappeared and was found dead a few hours after her parents had reported her missing. On that fateful day, the girl had visited her father and then ran back under the pretext that she did not want to miss The Simpsons. About 19 hours after this meeting, Rosario returned from work and saw her daughter in her room, where she was spreading her books on the floor to do her homework. The woman suspected nothing and simply drove to the cottage about half an hour away. She wanted to take her swimwear and some clothes because she had planned a beach vacation for the next day. Rosario returned around 9:30 p.m. At this point, Assunta was no longer in the apartment. The adoptive mother was worried because the girl had not called or announced that she would be on her way, which was untypical for her. But she thought the girl might have gone to a friend's house, although it was already late. The woman called the teenager's friends and her husband, but it turned out that no one had seen Assunta. Of course, the mother was considered the last person to have seen the girl alive, and thus she was among the first to arouse the interest of the investigators and to be brought in for questioning. In conversation with law enforcement authorities, Rosario recalled details from the night of July 4th when the first attack occurred. Assunta had locked the front door when they returned from shopping together and accidentally left the key in the lock. Her mother did not notice this circumstance, and both went to bed. Unexpectedly, Rosario woke up around 3 a.m. and heard cries for help. Alfonso was not with them at the time, and no one came to help. She went into her daughter's room where she saw the silhouette of a large man who seemed to be pressing his arm down and appeared to be trying to strangle the girl. The mother rushed at the attacker, but he was a strong man and easily threw her back against the wall. Fortunately, he injured no one and simply ran away. Rosario described him as a sturdy man in black of middle age. He wore a mask and gloves, making it impossible to give a more detailed description. Assunta told her friend about the incident and even sent her some photos of herself with red marks on her neck. The father said the girl had been having problems with depression for a long time and had even taken special medication prescribed by a doctor. This was confirmed as Assunta communicated with her friends and shared her concerns with them. However, the last dialogues on this topic were quite positive. The girl confirmed that she was feeling much better. Rosario claimed that after the attack, she had not tried to find out the truth. The woman referred to the difficult emotional state of the child and claimed she was afraid to upset Assunta, which would inevitably happen if she went to the police. However, this was not a convincing excuse. Years before the tragedy, the girl had even been admitted to a psychiatric hospital because she had repeatedly spoken of intentions to commit suicide. Assunta was very tired due to the overload at school and in tutoring, leading to breakdowns. The family had a difficult relationship with each other, but the parents managed to smooth things over and come to an agreement with the girl, at least they said so themselves. The girl's nanny told her that her mother had recently been very upset that Assunta no longer lived up to her ideals and had started to perform worse in school. The girl had become somewhat of a burden to Rosario, so she was looking for a way to get rid of her. After the investigators received this information, they decided to check the case immediately. First, they were interested in the cottage that Rosario had visited on the day the girl disappeared. Indeed, Assunta's body was found only 4 kilometers away. When the investigators arrived here, the woman did not seem to expect to see them. She rushed headlong upstairs, obviously trying to hide something. They caught up with her in the bathroom where Rosario was bent over a trash can. When one of the investigators looked inside, he saw a piece of orange rope, the same rope with which the victim's hands and feet had been tied. Also, there was a black mask and gloves. All items were taken for forensic examination. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or DNA were found. The 2 forensic scientists who had conducted the examination had not immediately measured the body temperature for fear of falsifying the evidence, so the exact time of death could not be determined, but Assunta was probably already dead for about 20 hours. It turned out that the cause of death was strangulation. Her mouth and nose had been covered with a soft object, probably a pillow, so she could no longer breathe and lost consciousness, after which she died. The most shocking thing was that the experts found a very high dose of lamb in the girl's blood. The content of 22 pills was found, which is 9 times the adult dose. 8 tests were conducted, and it turned out that this was not the first time. She had already suffered a similar overdose 3 months before her death, at the time of the first break-in. It is worth noting that an overdose of this medication leads to amnesia and the inability to control muscles and movements. It was used to treat anxiety disorders and insomnia. The police quickly found out that Rosario took it to combat depression, while it had not been prescribed to Assunta. Why she took the medication, no one could explain. According to the mother, the perpetrators had drugged the girl with the medication so she would not remember the events. The investigators began a comprehensive review of the surveillance cameras in the area, hoping to trace the girl's movements on that fateful day. At around 2 p.m., Assunta visited her father. At 5:21 p.m., the girl returned home. At 5:28 p.m., her mother arrived. Another camera at a gas station recorded at 6:20 p.m. a green Mercedes that belonged to Rosario, as she admitted. The car was heading towards the cottage, but it was obvious that a girl was sitting next to the driver, identified as the woman's adoptive daughter. They drove in the direction where Assunta's body was later found, completely contradicting the woman's earlier statements. Rosario automatically became the main suspect in this murder case. Thus, the woman found herself under interrogation again. She explained her lies with fear and shame that her adoptive daughter had disappeared under her care. Now she told a new version of the events, according to which they went shopping for swimwear together. But Assunta did not want to enter the cottage when they arrived. The student decided to wait in the car while her mother took care of everything necessary and also did a few errands. But it took a long time, and the girl asked to be driven home to do her homework and rest. Rosario agreed and drove her back, but dropped her off 5 minutes walk from the house, so she wouldn't have to drive through the narrow streets and curves with the car. The woman was worried that her daughter had not come home and had been attacked on the street. When she returned and did not find her daughter at home, she immediately took action and asked her husband for help. They drove to the police station. The man claimed he had been at home all day and had nothing to do with the incident. The police officers checked the surveillance footage of streets in the area of Santiago and could not determine when Rosario had driven her daughter back. They only found footage showing Rosario leaving the cottage alone around 9 p.m. There were many controversies and contradictions in this story. Rosario herself even appeared somewhat arrogant. In the eyes of the investigators, she was cold and did not seem to regret the loss of her child at all. She continued to insist that the large man in black had something to do with it. When the police spoke to the family's neighbors, one of them said that on the night in July when Assunta was first attacked, he had heard screams. He noticed a strange detail. Since the intruder had entered the apartment, the dogs living nearby should have barked. However, the animals were quiet, suggesting that the perpetrator was a frequent visitor and the animals knew him. All in all, the situation looked dubious and made Assunta's parents increasingly suspicious. The police considered 2 versions of the first break-in. Some believed it was an invention of the mother. Others thought it was the first attempt at murder. Hardly anyone believed that it was actually an outsider, as there were no signs of forced entry or other people who had broken in. On September 24th, the parents held a funeral. Rosario and Alfonso behaved quite strangely, even taking selfies in front of the coffin. Due to the lies in the witness statements, the woman was arrested after the funeral. By this time, the investigators had already figured out what the motive for the murder might have been. Witnesses were found who reported events that began 9 months before the tragedy and could have been the trigger for the bloody dispute. It was found that Rosario had started a relationship with a real estate agent named Manuel Garcia in January 2013, whom she had approached for the sale of properties. The man was married and made it clear that he would not leave his family. For him, it was just an affair, but Rosario agreed, and the secret relationship continued. During the same period, her relationship with her husband deteriorated rapidly. She called Alphonse boring and considered him a loser who simultaneously had too high an opinion of himself. The woman described him as unfeeling and calculating, while the lover was the complete opposite. She was sure that her husband would face financial ruin in the event of a separation. The husband saw a message from the lover on Rosario's phone, so they divorced in February 2013. Rosario and the girl continued to live in the apartment. She continued her business and visited the cottage. Custody of the girl was transferred to the mother at Asuna's request. The father had the right to see his daughter. Assun lived between the apartments of her father and her mother. Many noticed that the girl always stayed close to her mother, while her father was not so warm. Nevertheless, there were signs that the man was trying to build a relationship with the girl. He repeatedly told his ex-wife that they would be forever connected through their adoptive daughter. Could the desire to be completely free from her ex-husband have doomed an innocent child? It became known that Rosario was forced to break up with her lover, Manuel Garcia, in early summer. At that time, Rosario's condition deteriorated, and Alfonso seized the opportunity and took his wife's word to separate from her lover in return for taking care of his daughter while she was in the hospital. However, it became known that Rosario broke her promise on September 21st, spending most of the day with her lover and only returning home in the evening to meet Assunta. This is a very interesting fact when you think that the girl was murdered shortly afterward. Manuel had no intention of leaving his family for his mistress, as the man was empathetic and friendly. So the police considered the theory that Rosario might have tried to manipulate the man with the death of the girl. She was aware that such a loss would evoke sympathy in him and enable a bond with Manuel. This assumption was one of dozens expressed during the investigation. At this point, the suspect was already in full contact with her lawyer. The defender insisted on an important argument that refuted the version of the investigation. Male fluid was found on the deceased's clothing, so clearly a man was involved in the case. Either an accomplice or Rosario was telling the truth. It was not ruled out that the mother was not really involved in the murder, but this version was considered unlikely. This strong argument had to be refuted. The police took up the case with renewed vigor. The material for analysis was collected, and now they had to wait for the results. Primarily, they were interested in the origin of the male fluid samples on the victim's body. In the meantime, there were several possibilities, e.g., that the father was the attacker, but even more interesting was Manuel Garcia, the lover. However, he had an alibi and had no strong motive to kill the girl, so he was quickly crossed off the list of suspects. Unexpectedly, it turned out that the found DNA prints belonged to a complete stranger named Ramiro. He was a Colombian citizen living in Madrid, practically 6 hours by car from Santiago, where the tragedy occurred. All this seemed strange. The police officers confronted him, and the man went on the defensive from the beginning. He said he had no idea who Asuna was. He emphasized that he had never been in that city and had nothing to do with the murder. Ramiro had a confirmed alibi. He had had dinner with his girlfriend in a Madrid restaurant and was recorded by surveillance cameras. At that time, it was not possible to accuse the man of anything. He seemed honest. Even if one assumed that he had actually traveled to another city to commit the crime, this did not explain why the girl had not taken the prescription medication for months before the incident. Further tests revealed that only some of the found DNA traces belonged to Ramiro. The laboratory officials speculated that the data matched his DNA because the samples were of poor quality or the staff had not maintained complete sterility when handling the instruments, and therefore they were contaminated. The samples might have been intentionally placed by someone to confuse the investigation. At this stage, there were far more questions than answers. The investigators made the most unlikely assumptions, and even the parents' behavior contributed to this, as they seemed not to care at all about what happened to the girl. Technically, Rosario was the last person to have seen Assunta alive, but many doubted that she could have managed everything alone since she was quite petite and did not appear very strong. leading investigators to doubt her physical ability to recover Assunta's body. Using cell phone towers, the police tried to determine where the girl's parents were at the time of the murder. It turned out that both had their cell phones turned off on this fateful day. This fact puzzled the police and seemed suspicious. The parents claimed it was a mere coincidence that both phones were off at the same time and insisted there was no malicious intent. Regarding the medication, Rosario mentioned that she had used a prescription a doctor had given her for panic attacks, but when the document expired, she continued to buy the drugs illegally. The lax legislation regarding such medications contributed to this issue. The local pharmacist, who was friends with Rosario, allowed her to obtain the pills without any problems. However, after speaking with this acquaintance, the investigators learned that the mother of the murdered girl had requested the pills only on July 5th, a day after the burglar had broken into the house and attacked the girl. Moreover, her husband had recently bought large quantities of the medications. Due to all these circumstances, the investigators decided to arrest all phones. As it turned out, some teachers of the girl had noticed oddities in her behavior shortly before the tragedy. One day, Assunta came with her father to violin lessons, acting as if she could not control herself. Alfonso claimed his daughter was simply under the influence of allergy medications. The teachers confirmed that she had always been very reserved and never talked about her life. Over time, the incident with her drowsiness repeated itself, but the parents always found an excuse, usually referring to the student's health condition. The teacher doubted and did not believe the parents of the adopted girl when contacted by the police. She described Assunta's symptoms and her behavior exactly as the list of side effects of the illegal substances. When the father picked up his daughter, the teacher described what had happened, and her suspicion only increased when the man changed the story and now claimed the daughter had taken a different medication. All this seemed more and more like a lie and was clearly suspicious. The last incident occurred 2 days before the tragedy. On that day, Rosario went to the teacher and said that her daughter could not come to class due to a strong reaction to the prescribed medications. After this statement, the investigators had no more doubts that the adoptive parents knew about the medications and were trying to poison the child. In August 2013, when the mother was plagued by depression, the girl was sent on a vacation to the countryside with her nanny. She spent there a month, and her parents called regularly but never visited Assunta. Without her parents, the girl seemed cheerful, happy, and carefree. Throughout all phases of this case, the same fact kept reappearing. Alfonso desperately wanted to restore the relationship with his former wife. In June 2013, just 2 months before the tragedy, Rosario was admitted to the hospital with a nervous breakdown. During this time, Alfonso even moved back in. In some ways, the man was pleased when his wish to be reunited with his family seemed to be coming true. During this time, Rosario stopped seeing her lover. Her husband visited her in the hospital and took care of her after she was discharged. It seemed that things in the family were starting to improve, but as it later turned out, she lied as she continued to communicate with her lover and saw him on the day of the murder. In light of the uncovered facts, the new assumption of the investigation was Alfonso's revenge. Perhaps he wanted to inflict even more pain on Rosario than he had suffered because of her infidelity. This could explain how the orange rope ended up in the urn at the country house. It was simply placed there by Alfonso. But why did she know about these items and was so frightened when the police visited her and ran directly to the trash can? Probably she knew about it and was an accomplice. It was obvious that the ex-husband was a rather vindictive person. He even tried to call Manuel Garcia's wife to tell her about his extramarital affair. The police uncovered an important pattern. When the man was in the house with his ex-wife and their daughter, Assunta was always drugged with some medication, but Alfonso refused to admit this. He claimed he was innocent. After their arrest, Rosario's behavior was erratic, from hysterical to depressive, while Alfonso was calm and composed, constantly trying to reassure her, telling her that they just needed to love and support each other, and that it would all be over soon. Despite all his convincing words, the police officers noticed how cold the man was. After some time, it was possible to discover the storage medium used by Alfonso. It turned out that the hard drive of his laptop had been completely replaced. Experts were able to calculate that more than 500,000 photos and videos were stored on it, probably compromising material. The police found out that Alfonso had an unhealthy interest in Asian girls. On his social media page, there were indications of dozens of dates and correspondence with Asian girls. According to most investigators who saw the photos of the accounts, these girls were underage. Furthermore, the man was exclusively interested in Asian girls with the most childlike appearance. Later, a woman who owned an escort agency approached the police station. According to her confession, Alfonso regularly visited the establishment, always only ordering Asian girls and demanding that they dress like schoolgirls. Even the wife knew about this weakness. The photos of the murdered girl in revealing clothing obtained in this context looked even more compromising. In pretrial detention, they discussed interesting topics, c.g., whether they had managed to eliminate all evidence, but the prosecutor pointed out how cruelly this calm, sensible man had treated his former wife. The accusation stated that the perpetrators covered for each other. In reality, both were involved in the child's death, probably burdened by an adopted daughter after the couple's separation, which could have been a motive for the crime. Their behavior and the witness statements spoke volumes about this. The defendants did not cooperate with the investigations and refused to talk without their lawyer. Later, on the advice of their defenders, they no longer commented on the tragedy at all. During this whole time, the media were in an uproar. It was about rich people involved in something so dirty that the food for rumors seemed endless. Viral photos played a big role in this, discussed all over the internet, also internationally. Forensic psychiatrists played an important role in the investigations. After analyzing the behavior of the adoptive parents, the experts saw two narcissists with similar personality disorders, caught by the power of money, pampered and capricious. Apparently, they had only adopted Assunta to present a loving family under pressure from Rosario's parents. She became a toy for them, unfortunately, first exploited and then disposed of when she was no longer needed. On the side of the prosecution stood a witness, a 15-year-old acquaintance of Assunta. Although Alfonso claimed that he had not left the house all day until the evening on the day of the murder, this turned out to be a lie. The girl saw him with Assunta around 6 p.m. in front of Rosario's house. This was later confirmed by camera recordings. Also, at 9 p.m., after the disappearance but before the call from Rosario, he was seen on the cameras. Contradictory facts added to the list of evidence against the couple. Indeed, the trial was very controversial. Even the judge's behavior was questioned. Many believed he only wanted to become famous, and this suspicion turned out to be unfounded. Sometime after the end of the trial, he wrote a book about Assunta, although it was really just an attempt to become famous. The defendants had their supporters. Relatives and neighbors had watched for years as the foster parents tried to create better conditions for the child. They had money, ambition, and difficult characters, but those close to them saw that they did everything for Assunta. Many still believe that the outcome of the trial, despite all the oddities in their behavior, was a miscarriage of justice. This opinion is especially widespread among those engaged outside of Spain. The defendants themselves did not plead guilty during the trial. During the trial, Alfonso behaved calmly and sensibly, while Rosario constantly cried and fell into hysteria, confused in her statement and justifying her behavior with the effect of medications. Rosario's cousin spoke during the trial and told interesting facts. The parents of the accused had died suddenly at home within 7 months of each other in the years 2011 and 2012, before the death of Assunta. The cousin suspected that Rosario was involved in the murder of both the parents and the daughter to gain sole possession of the entire estate. The defense attorney rejected this assumption. Rosario's mother was 77 and her father 88 years old. They had died in their beds of old age, and nothing suspicious had been found during the medical examination. However, their bodies, like Assunta's, had been cremated, and the remains could not be examined to determine a violent death. The prosecution, on the other hand, insisted that the child's parents were real psychopaths. Alfonso was clearly a pedophile who drugged his adoptive daughter and then lived out his fantasies. As the girl got older, she could remember these events and report them, so they decided to get rid of her as a threat. The theory was supported by numerous photos and evidence that the man had a pathological attraction to underage Asian girls. Probably Rosario was also involved, or she knew about it and still covered up her husband's dirty deeds. Perhaps she also simply decided to get rid of the girl because she was no longer needed and did it with Alfonso. On October 30th, 2015, the court found them guilty and sentenced them to 18 years in prison each. After serving the sentence, both filed appeals, which were denied. On November 18, 2020, Rosario was found dead in her prison cell with a belt around her neck. It turned out that it was her third attempt to voluntarily end her life. Alfonso is still behind bars and continues to assert his innocence. The case has not only caused a great stir in Spain, but also in China, sparking a fierce controversy over the granting of custody to foreign nationals. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.